When someone says something insulting to you, you react. You may react outwardly or not, but inwardly there's a reaction. So even if you don't say or do anything in return, inwardly there's a reaction. You get upset, you feel sad or angry, insulted or offended. You may be having a good day and someone says one little thing that ruins it. Maybe your entire week is ruined. Maybe you feel like your entire life is ruined. All because of this one thing that someone said. And think about how much power there is in that, how much power others have over how we feel. But the reality is that we give them that power by simply giving value to what is said, to other people's opinions, judgments, and so on. To take something personally means that we've made it all about us. We are insulted. We are offended. But what about the other person? What is their intention, their motivation? What's going on inside of them that has led them to behave inconsiderately, insultingly? We don't often consider this. First of all, it may be that there was no intention at all to insult or offend. What was said may have been very innocent. It may even be that we've misinterpreted, misunderstood, or misheard. And this is something that we should always consider. But even if what was said seems intended to insult or offend, if the person's tone was harsh, if they seemed aggressive and rude, we should try to understand where all of that is coming from. When someone says something cruel or mean, we tend to assume that the person is simply cruel or mean, but we don't often consider why they may behave in that way. Something that I've observed is that a person who is genuinely happy is incapable of cruelty and insult. Have you ever noticed this? Have you ever met anyone who is genuinely happy, who was mean to anyone? And just look at your own life. Think of a time when you were immensely happy. During that time, did you ever do anything to intentionally hurt or insult anyone? And think about any time when you may have been when you may have intentionally hurt or insulted someone. Were you happy then? Or were you unhappy? Because what I've observed is that someone who is mean or cruel is someone who is deeply unhappy. Someone who is overly critical or judgmental is someone who has a lot of negative self-judgment. Their tendency to judge others is a way of distracting from their own negative judgments about themselves. A person who is deeply hurting, who is carrying sadness and anger for whatever the reason, will often project that out onto others, even onto those who are innocent. In fact, often it's easier to project it onto the innocent than onto those who were actually angry with. For example, if your boss is hard on you and you become angry, you might feel that you can't project that anger at your boss because you might lose your job. And so instead you project it onto your partner or your children or a stranger because there may be nothing that they can do to you. There may be no repercussion. Or think about the bully at school. What most of us don't consider is that the bully is often a victim of bullying. Usually it's a parent or older sibling that bullies them, and they feel powerless to react to that person. And so they look for someone who seems weaker than them, and then they project all of their hostility onto that person instead. We only see them as cruel, mean, ill-tempered, and so on. What we rarely consider is what's actually going on inside of them. We don't consider how unhappy they are, how sad or frustrated. We don't consider that they may be deeply hurting. Often when a person seeks to exert power over others, it's because deep down they feel powerless. A person who belittles others often feels little. A person who insults, criticizes, or judges often feels deeply flawed, inadequate, or ashamed. Their behavior toward others is often a way to deflect attention away from these uncomfortable feelings and beliefs which they hold about themselves. And I'm not suggesting that any of this excuses their behavior, it only explains it. But in understanding this, we can recognize that their behavior towards us really has nothing to do with us. It actually reveals much about them. And when we realize this, we don't have to take any of it personally. So this should be sufficient in understanding why others may be judgmental or critical or insulting and so on. But I want to take it a little deeper. I want us to explore further just who it is that feels insulted, belittled, offended. So what exactly does it mean to take something personally? Personally means having to do with the person. But who or what is the person? Is it who we are, or is it just who we believe ourselves to be? When someone says something insulting, who is insulted? What does it even mean to be insulted? We tend to think of insult as being a type of injury, but what exactly is injured? If we're talking merely in terms of what someone says, how is it that their words cause injury? Injury to what? What is injured is the image of who we think ourselves to be, or who we present ourselves to be. But the image is not who we are. It's a mental construct made up of various thoughts, beliefs, judgments, identifications, and so on. It's been called by many names. We call it the ego, the false self, the persona. But whatever we call it, simply understand that it isn't who you really are. It's just an idea. Imagine that you've drawn a picture of yourself, not as you are necessarily, but rather as a representation, the way that you see yourself psychologically. And this representation may emphasize certain features of your personality, characteristics, qualities, and so on. Now imagine that someone comes along and tries to change something about that image. Either they draw something else onto the image, or they try to erase something. But whatever the case, it's done with the intent to insult. In other words, they damage the image in some way. All they've done is damage an image, a picture. They've done no damage to you, but only to the image that you have of yourself. And yet you're upset because you don't distinguish between the image and who you actually are. So therefore, anything which is done to that image, you assume is done directly to you. And this is why we tend to get so offended. This is why we become defensive. We're defending our image, our identity, our false self. So it's important to understand this, to make that distinction. It's important to understand that the image that you have of yourself is not who you truly are. In fact, it's very likely that the image you have of yourself has not even been constructed entirely by you. What's more likely is that it's been constructed from elements given to you by others. If you were raised in a particular religion, for example, you take that religion and make that a part of your identity, a part of that image. If you're raised in a particular country with a particular nationality, that becomes a part of that image. If you were told that you were inadequate in some way or another, you take that story and add it into the image. So the image is your identity, who you believe yourself to be, all the various things that you identify as, all the judgments that you've adopted about yourself, and so on. We take things personally because we identify so much with that persona, which is based on so many things we've adopted from others. And why have we adopted these things, these identifications, these beliefs, these judgments? Because we care too much what other people think. We have such a strong need to be accepted and approved of by others that we've allowed everyone else to define who we are. And when someone doesn't approve of us, we take it very personally. When we feel insulted, offended, criticized, it's essentially a feeling of disapproval, a sense of being devalued, or we might say it's a feeling of disrespect, which is really the same thing. If someone doesn't respect us, it means that they don't value us. But why do we care so much? Could it be that we value the opinions of others more than we value ourselves? Because if we truly valued ourselves, if we fully accepted ourselves, other people's opinions would mean nothing to us. So ultimately, we need to come to a place of no longer putting value in other people's opinions of us. This comes back to realizing that a person's negative behavior toward us is really about them and their own personal issues. But this also means no longer relying on others to value us at all. This means not even relying on people's positive opinions of us, because our dependence on others to give us validation, to accept and approve of us, is really what's gotten us in this mess to begin with. It's nice to feel accepted, to feel valued, to have approval and appraisal, but if we depend on others for this, then we're going to be disappointed time and again, because there will always be those who won't offer those things to us. There will also be those who outright reject us, who devalue us, who disapprove and criticize. And again, it may have nothing to do with us, but as long as we're dependent upon others to define our sense of value, we're going to interpret these things as a reflection of our value. We're going to get upset, feel offended, insulted, and so on. And so we need to come to a place where we're no longer affected by praise or criticism, by approval or disapproval, acceptance or rejection. This means we have to define our own value independent of what anyone else thinks. And that really starts by accepting ourselves fully just as we are and recognizing all the valuable qualities that we have. In that state of mind, we don't put value in other people's opinions and judgments, and we don't take things personally. If you find this content valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.